gold has become a little bit more than just a safe haven. It's fast becoming a weapon of geopolitical leverage.
Clearly, the weaponization of the dollar after the second invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that was a shot heard around the world. Whoever decides, whisper in Trump's ear, and it should be Powell or it should be Yellen before it, right? Whoever those people are, I think they understand gold. None of this changes his agenda or his trajectory or the pain still to be felt from the decisions already being done. Trump is trying to change the global economic order, not just the United States. And I don't know if he's an angel or a devil. I think he wants to go down in history.
Exactly. The pain tolerance that this requires, I don't think exists in America right now.
And it does in China.
And it does in China, exactly. Where do we go from here with inflation? Are we headed for stagflation, inflation, deflation? Where are we going? Before we get started, this isn't financial advice. Know your risk tolerance, do your own due diligence, and speak to a financial advisor. All right, so welcome back to another pod. Things are getting pretty crazy, both geopolitically and in the global economy. Currencies are wobbling, alliances are splintering, and economic conflict is heating up once again. In that chaos, gold has become a little bit more than just a safe haven. It's fast becoming a weapon of, I think, geopolitical leverage. Today, I'm joined by one of the sharpest speculators out there and a miner and metals specialist, Lobo Tiggre, founder of the Independent Speculator. Lobo has one heck of a track record and real-world, boots-on-the-ground experience, having trekked across more than 60 countries, from remote jungles to war zones, to uncover real world-shaping opportunities, particularly in the precious metals industry. We're going to delve into where some of the richest gold and silver opportunities are hiding, how Trump's policies could and perhaps already have reshaped global markets for the long term, and why the next battle over economic supremacy might not be fought with weapons, but with bullion. Lobo, it's great to have you on. Welcome to the pod.
Well, thank you very much for that kind intro. It reminds me, I'm actually bootless at the moment. My last pair wore out on me when I was in Argentina. I won't get too distracted, but the sole fell off. And that's the third pair I believe I've worn out on behalf of readers. So I'm headed to Switzerland soon, and I'm thinking I can get a nice pair there.
Yeah, probably. Well, you're working hard, and I'm sure your subscribers greatly appreciate it. So we're going to jump around a bit today, focus on precious metals, but just on a macro level, I just want to touch on gold and get your thoughts on it. Throughout history, gold has been pulled back into the center of power during times of chaos. And that pattern seems to keep repeating itself, even in the modern day, from my point of view. What do you think? Are we seeing gold be pulled back into the center of geopolitics and global power once again right now?
I do. So that's, the happy gold bug answer. A more mainstream answer, though, I think still takes us to the same place, is the de-dollarization trend. Yeah. And my fellow Puerto Rican, Brent Johnson, the dollar milkshake guy, likes to debunk the de-dollarization hype. And actually, I agree with him. It's not going to disappear tomorrow, the dollar, that is, or its reserve currency status. But at the same time, it is happening. I mean, there's no question. Just look at the chart. The U.S. dollar's share of reserves around the world, that is a long, I don't remember how many years now, but it's now a couple decades, if not more, of that percentage sliding. So that is happening. And clearly, the weaponization of the dollar after the second invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that was a shot heard around the world, a financial shot heard around the world, and not just by Russia, not even just BRICS, right? The Germans have accelerated their request for, we'd really like to have our gold back now, please, pretty please. So this is a real thing that even the mainstream can't ignore. So if you want to look at it historically, a la Ray Dalio style, look at these big megatrends in history. Clearly gold has always been a central part of that. The delusion that we could substitute paper for gold and silver and even copper, or anything real, right? That is being shaken now. And I do think that it eventually comes to an end. I want to say before that becomes the hypey headline, I don't really see this as an investable thesis. As I was just saying with Brent Johnson, the de-dollarization trend, that takes many years to play out. What's investable now is China buying gold, still buying gold. That part of it is investable now. The bigger picture of JP Morgan saying gold is money, everything else is credit, right? That as a, free marketeer, that matters to me as a student of history, as a student of the human condition, it matters to me, but it doesn't inform my investment decisions today. That's a long-term trend. And I don't know where you want to go from there, but that's how I see the framework.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good starting point. Do you think, central banks, particularly in the East, I mean, we've seen it even in places like Turkey and so forth, but do you think they're hoarding gold more than ever now because they see it playing a more pivotal role in the global monetary system? And is that something that could happen in our lifetime? Is this just an insurance policy keeping gold? It's a diversification strategy, or do the central banks actually see it playing a more significant role in the monetary system?
Well, my friend Doug Casey wants to define central bankers as idiots who dress well. So, it's dangerous to try to think too much about what they're thinking. But let maybe take a step back. The powers that be, whoever they really are back there, whoever decides that, whisper in Trump's ear and it should be Powell or it should be Yellen before, right? Whoever those people are, I think they understand gold. Let's say I'm the scion of a very old European family with wealth that goes back centuries, if not millennia. If I come from that tradition, I understand where gold is. And I have a friend in Switzerland, actually. His name is Aegon. He's not the other Aegon that you see in interviews all the time, just my old school chum, Aegon. And he's a money manager. He's a wealth manager. And he deals with people like this. And he tells people when the younger ones walk into his office because the last generation has moved on and they say, well, what's all this gold doing here? What do we do with this gold? He says, leave it there. That gold is not there to make you rich. That gold is there to prevent you from becoming poor, right? They get that. This makes sense. So what I'm saying is, I think in the sort of the bigger picture of the world, the people who get it, the deeper thinkers out there, the real deeper thinkers, I think they all understand what I think of as sort of the Dalio-esque, not Dali-esque, look of history and where the critical role gold plays in there. As far as, what is the head of the central bank of Turkey thinking right now, that may or may not be related, and it may or may not matter if he's a puppet. But the fact is that even if you take the least case, it's just a defensive measure after the weaponization of the dollar, it's just a bit of diversification. Who cares? That's still very bullish for gold, and it doesn't go away. This is the key. This is why I say this is investable. If central bank buying is putting a floor under gold, they don't care if the Fed raises interest rates or drops interest rates another quarter point or skips or holds this next meeting. That doesn't matter at all to their marching orders. I think if you look at that as sort of a base case or worst case or least case scenario, it's extremely bullish, and I never think of them as just precious metals because something being expensive doesn't make it a financial instrument necessarily. So I always distinguish between monetary metals and industrial metals. Precious is somewhere in between. People were calling palladium, not just platinum, which has more of a patina, but palladium became another precious metal. It's an industrial metal. It's not historically money. It is an industrial metal. And clearly, even platinum bulls out there, they get mad at me for saying this, but you look at the price action in platinum and it responds to industrial inputs, not financial inputs. It's no surprise to me that it has diverged from gold for over 10 years now. For your various scenarios that you laid out in your question, the least case is just that diversification case. If there is an active plan from the BRICS countries to gold back an inter-BRIC currency at some point, notch this up a level, I don't know if that's going to happen. It actually does make sense to me. If you're Russia and China, how much do you really trust each other? They smile and they shake hands on TV and all that. Russo-Sino conflict goes back for a very long time, and there's little love to be lost between those cultures. I mean, after a few cups have gone around, Ganbei, right, the hatred these people feel for each other tends to come out. And so in that kind of world where they don't want the dollar, they don't trust each other, then backing some currency that it makes sense for them to get involved with something real and independent and verifiable, it makes perfect sense to me. This, of course, doesn't mean it needs to happen anytime soon, right? Yeah. The problem I have with the gold-backed BRICS currency is not the idea, but all these hyped-up people are saying, it's happening next week or next year.
Right.
Or you remember the South Africa meeting, BRICS meeting? It was announced there. Like, people were telling me, I was getting email from clients, what should we do with our gold stocks when the BRICS countries announce the gold-backed currency on August 24th, right?
Yeah.
Right? And I just think, come on, don't you get tired of being hyped into the wrong decision? For the people, loading up their Rotten Tomato slingshots, bear with me on this. I'm not hostile to the idea, but just don't let yourself get hyped into some rash decision. Higher level, realpolitik, we'll never know. Whoever today's, Rothschilds are, unless we get a confess all deathbed type book out there someday, in hindsight, we may know, but we're never going to know. So this is why this is not really very investable to me. What is investable is it's happening, right? And if gold corrects from 35 all the way down to 33, and that's, struggles back again, this is very bullish. So it's hard for me to say, oh, it's going up from the moon when we're at such high levels. I'm a fundamentalist, and all the reasons why gold went to 35, they're all still there. None of it's going away. I think the markets are breathing a sigh of relief with Trump sort of walking back some of his rhetoric and sounding a little nicer. He stopped talking about firing Powell. None of this changes his agenda or his trajectory or the pain still to be felt from the decisions already being done, right? All those empty container ships not coming from China, even if Trump changes course today, will have an impact yet to be felt. And there's no sign that Trump is changing course.
I want to get into Trump, but first, you clearly differentiate between, monetary metals, precious metals. So, most precious metals bulls still treat silver as sort of gold's high beta sidekick. You've said silver may never go back to tracking gold the way it used to. What makes you convinced that the historic silver gold ratio is broken?
In the first place, it used to be for most of history, roughly 19-1, something like that. It left that, and it's never gone back to that. And then for a long time, it was 50 to 60-1. That's the sort of the new-ish normal that silver bulls wish we could get back to. I'm not sure how long it's been since that was there, but that is a long time now, too. When you've got a divergence from historic trends that goes on for a year or two, okay, a decade or two, you have to start asking yourself if the use case has changed here. And we are clearly seeing times when silver, not just the yearly trend or whatever, but like the daily wiggles. You'll see gold and the dollar inversely, and you'll see silver track copper. You can hate me if you want, call me Darth Silver as they do, right? Throw rotten tomatoes at me, but this is just a fact. And if you ignore the facts in the marketplace, okay, let's say it's all manipulation. Fine, it's all manipulation. It's still the fact. It's still doing that. And neither you nor I nor our audience has the power to stop that manipulation. So dismissing it as manipulation doesn't help me make a decision as a speculator. And my goal here is not to be an ideologue, not to defend silver to the death. And I am a silver bull. I'm not anti-silver. I'm just an investor, a speculator, trying to make money in these markets on the stocks, by the way. My stacks, those are not trading sardines. They don't go anywhere. And I have more physical silver than gold. The thesis is not anti-silver. The thesis is that, reality, I think, tells us that silver's use case has changed, is changing. It's taking on more and more of an industrial role. And in terms of financial instruments, it's telling you that Basel III includes gold as a tier 1 asset, but not silver. And you can say, oh, well, that's the central bankers. They hate monetary metal, or they hate silver. Well, fine, but it still is what it is, right? Gold is still considered by, major players in the mainstream as a tier 1 financial asset. And we see that happening right now. This is playing out real time right now, where even the people on Yahoo Finance who like to talk about nothing other than Chipotle and Nvidia, even these people are talking about gold, and they don't sneer the way they used to. I remember like a year or two ago, and some guest from some hedge fund or whatever would come in and say, we're also hedging a little bit with gold. And they'd be like, gold. That has changed. The sneering is gone. And the hosts, the interviewers, are even saying, well, what about a bit of a hedge with gold? I hate to say this because it's not entirely bullish, but it has become a crowded trade, gold. We can argue about whether it should be or shouldn't be. The fact is it is. And again, you ignore that at your own peril. Now, to help out my silver bull fans here, my bullish case here, or my uber bullish case, if you will, on silver, is that for these very same reasons, once the recessionary forces settle down, if we get a Trump session or we don't, and it's in the rearview mirror, I think we're in for a reflationary boom either way. And at that point, silver gets the tailwind from its industrial side. The solar panels and all, medical uses, all this other stuff, electronics, all this stuff that silver has that gold really doesn't. We make gold crucibles for fusion experiments. That's not a huge use case. Right. So in that environment, You have an inflationary environment that's bullish for monetary metals, gold and silver, and you have the industrial side that's also bullish for silver, but not gold. So in that context, which I do think is coming, silver becomes the win-win metal, and gold's just the win metal, just the win metal.
Right.
So don't take me wrong. I don't hate silver. I'm not anti-silver. But this reality, and even other silver uber bulls will tell you that silver typically lags at first and then more than catches up on the end. So even if you're not Darth Silver, you just agree with that historical trend. There's no rush into silver right now. And I get it that we got close to 35 and it was exciting and so on. But guess what? It bounced off that.
Yeah.
And that Trumpsession scare is still in front of us. So the industrial side, for now, I do see as a headwind for silver. I mean, I'm convinced that it will become a tailwind. I just don't think we're there yet.
So, if the silver gold ratio isn't as relevant anymore, it's such a nice measuring stick, right? Like,
sorry, let me jump in. I promise I'll give you the mic back, but there is a way that I do think the gold silver ratio helps us. And it's not just that it's extreme, because an extreme can get more extreme. Right? We thought $2,000 gold was an extreme, and it sure has gotten a lot more extreme, right? We are not at record levels at the GSR. I think the previous record was over 125, if memory serves. Okay. So at 100, it can still get 25% worse just to get to an old record. So the GSR by itself, even if it argues for reversion to mean, it doesn't say when. And we are in uncharted waters, so it could easily get much worse before it gets better. But here's the thing, and this is useful, and I do pay attention to this, and it would actually change my investment marching orders if this happens. And that is that the GSR by itself doesn't tell me, but its direction, its momentum, does. If the alligator jaws are opening, right, the GSR keeps going up. It doesn't tell me which way they'll close, right? It can close by gold coming down or silver going up. So I don't want to pile into silver just because the GSR is going up. On the other side, once the GSR is coming down, at that point, that question has been answered. We will know whether the GSR is falling because gold is falling, which is not good for silver or gold, or because silver is coming up, which is very bullish for silver. If we get to that point, and this could happen, let me say, I would expect this to happen this year. I don't think those jaws can open forever. So if the jaws close with silver going up, then that will be a very strong buy signal for me.
That pretty much answers my question there. I appreciate that. So when you look at opportunities, I know obviously you invest heavily in the miners of precious metals. What regions or, jurisdictions do you think right now are providing the best opportunity for speculators of the miners?
But let me just take a step backwards. A really great speculation, ticks all the boxes. It's a compelling value proposition. It's not just exciting. It's got some kind of momentum. There's something I call success in progress, and that's not just, we've drilled into something. It's we're drilling into something, and our geological model works. Like it has predictive value. We keep hitting, right? Something like that, a really great speculation is so rare that when I find one, unless it's in an absolute no-fly zone for me, like some West African countries that have had multiple coups d'etats in recent years. Yeah. I agree with that, but there are certainly jurisdictions that are more dangerous. AK-47 Central is just a no-go for me. Latin American countries going in the wrong direction, not interested. I was much more worried about Chile when Gabriel got in and started talking crazy stuff and rewriting the Constitution and all that.
Nationalization and all this.
But that's all kind of blown over. And it's not that means there's no concern in Chile, but projects have been permitted. The mining continues. The government is really backed off. So I still like Chile. I'm less worried about it than I was before. Argentina is clearly very interesting now. There, the government has not just gotten more pro-business, but explicitly pro-mining.
Yeah.
And they want to develop the wealth that Argentina has to be able to, grow themselves out of the hole the previous administration has got them into. So Argentina has become very interesting to me. People are asking about Mexico. It does seem that Scheinbaum's bark was worse than her bite. But, that doesn't really make Mexico an all-clear sign for me. We've had some good news on the permitting front, but not really the kind of open pit permits that would show that this government understands and actively supports mining, even environmentally responsible mining in the country. We need to see more than words. We need to see some real action in the real world there. But I am less afraid of Mexico than it's not as bad as I thought. I have not invested another dollar yet since Scheinbaum, but if she shows that the country is open, not just for business, but for mining, could certainly go there, which, as a silver bull would be great. There's so few great silver projects to consider, and it seems like half of them are in Mexico, and that's still a no-go zone for me. This leads us to the answer to your question. On the one hand, it makes things easier. Like, clearly the so-called first world jurisdictions with strong rule of law that are pro-mining, those are the easier ones from the political risk question to get into. But then you have the valuation question. If you're in Red Lake, Ontario, are you already getting paid in advance? You've got an exploration play that doesn't even have a resource on it and is worth $500 million according to the market. By the time you produce a feasibility study, that could be the net present value of the project, and then you've been paid in advance. There's no upside in that. So the political jurisdiction being positive alone doesn't make something investable. I still need that value proposition. On the other hand, I'm certainly, the answer to your question is I'm certainly, keen to find an overlooked gem if I can in Ontario or Nevada or something like that.
I asked that question because just as the value of certain metals have risen, it seems renegotiating royalties or nationalization strategies have increased. Like, I even look at Panama, right? Like, that to me was...
that was pretty crazy.
That was theft. Yeah. And as the value of these metals rise, my concern for nationalization and just renegotiating deals, it increases. So
sorry, there's another Doug Casey quote. He likes to say you can run, but you can't hide. Specifically on mining. This is an old Doug Caseyism, but I remember when he said it to me last was when I think Quebec used to be number one on the Fraser surveys, right? They still had their tax incentives, but the taxes on the actual miners went up. And I remember, Doug, you can run, but you can't hide, even Quebec. So that risk is ever present there. Graham and Dodd fame. But I remember specifically him reading that mining is the entire business was not suitable for the type of security analysis that Graham and Dodd are famous for, because the underlying commodities are too volatile, let alone the business expense. There's no rational way to evaluate those securities and come up with an expected return on investment in a world that volatile. So, that's why I'm a speculator, not an investor.
And likewise, and I've done well in the mining space. I've also lost a ton of money in the mining space, but that's kind of part of the game. It is a bit of a numbers game. You learn, but you never know everything, and you never will. You're obviously a very, very sharp guy. You call yourself a speculator, but you're also obviously a good investor. What made you want to jump into the high risk, high reward world of mining stocks and things like that? Why didn't you go into a different avenue of finance? Like, what was the impetus?
Well, I'm older than I look. This is my third or fourth career, I suppose. Honestly, the answer is it was accidental, and I didn't get here because I knew anything about geology. I never studied it. I had never invested when Doug Casey offered me a job. I didn't know what a warrant was. I'm a writer. My mental self-image is I'm a writer. And at the time, Doug and David had just founded Casey Research, and they needed an editor. Doug was he'd been writing, he used to call his newsletter, The International Speculator, a bad habit that he'd been writing since 1970 or whatever it was. And he was kind of tired of it. So, Doug and David formed a partnership, got an office, hired a secretary, a marketing guy, and then an editor. And I was that third hire to help work with the geologists and the other people helping with the input to the newsletter. And that's really how it started. The honest answer is it wasn't merit, or at least merit in this field. They knew me. They trusted me. They knew I was smart. Sorry, but they did. And then I just loved it. As a little kid, I never studied geology, but as a kid, I collected rocks. I like to travel. I like to write, and I get paid to do all of these things, right? I get to hike in the Andes in places where no tourists ever go with world-class geologists, David Lowell and people like that, right? Dick Silito. That guy's amazing. And just to stand there and listen to him ask the questions of the geologists and the management of the company and so on. It's just a fantastic education. I'm sorry it's not available to everybody. I do my best to educate my audience, but it's just, I happen to be lucky, honestly, is the answer. And I hope I learned a thing or two along the way.
You talk about how you self-identify as a writer. This is definitely off topic, but interesting. With all these large language models like ChatGPT and so forth coming out, how do you think that affects or that will impact writers and people like yourself? Because I see a lot.
We could do a whole hour on this, but let's do it real quick. So when that first came out, I asked it for the first, big splat. It was a GPT-3, whatever. I asked it, well, where do you think the gold price is going? I wouldn't answer that question, but a robot might. It actually gave me a reasonable answer. And then I asked it, where do you think the copper price is going? It was the same thing with copper instead of gold, the same caveats. And, and I was like, okay, this is like a sixth grader who's cribbing from the Encyclopedia Britannica or something. And, the more questions I asked it, the more stupid it obviously was. Like, this is not artificial intelligence. Speech prediction that's not thinking. There's no understanding. And I told the team, if anybody uses this, I'll fire you. And then it got better, and there's still no understanding there. It's still just a predictive tool, a speech predictive tool. Is that they're talking about reasoning skills, but it's still not. Clearly, to me, it's not, and it hallucinates. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, I asked one of these things what time it was in Bogota, and it was off by 5 hours. How the hell can you get that wrong, right? A simple Google search would do better. Anyway. But it has improved, and it does help find things. Like search is actually materially better now. Even you may not think you're an AI user, but if you actually do search on Google now, that is an AI search.
Oh, yeah.
And that is helpful enough that it is actually something we're using in the business. We've also got IT guys on board. We're using scripts internally to help us, find the information we're looking for more efficiently. We're using AI to match client requests for information with information we have, things like that. There's clearly efficiencies that we're looking for here and that we're starting to make use of, and I think every business is. But in my mind, there is no understanding there. There is no judgment there. There's no even awareness of how stupid the things are when they're being stupid. And I'm not worried about my job. And to some degree, the more other firms rely on AI to do their so-called research, the more opportunity for me there is to go and apply my boots on the ground. And that's one thing that AIs by themselves. I mean, maybe someday if they can put them in a robot and you can send the robot to go kick the rocks instead of the old wolf, maybe that'll threaten my job. But for right now, I combine boots on the ground due diligence with human understanding, and I just see no substitute for that.
No, I agree. What do you think makes a great writer? We all have our favorite columnists, right? Why do we love certain writers, I guess is what I'm trying to say. What makes a writer great?
Someone who makes us think, especially rethink. And there's different types of writing, of course. I'm kind of a technical writer and an educator. And if I achieve that, and I hear from readers like, wow, I've learned so much. I mean, I've even got people who unsubscribe. They'll say, I've been reading you for years. Thanks, I got it from here. You've taught me, and I can do this on my own now. I consider that a success, actually.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right? But if you're J.R.R. Tolkien, you do educate, you do teach something, and you touch on something profoundly, deeply human that I think someone like me can barely even, get around the edges of. So a truly great writer makes us think, makes us feel. We grow as a human being as a result of our interaction with that writing. In my view, that makes it great. And it's not about the wordsmithing, though to that point, one of the amazing things about Shakespeare, Shakespeare just blows my mind. Like maybe he was an alien.
Why do you say that?
Because it's so beyond. That one person could write all that by itself is amazing. But he does all these things I'm talking about. He, Taming of the Shrew or Othello or any of these things, they make us look at the human condition, unless we're absolute brutes, our own position in that. And we think about our world, we think about ourselves. And if we pay attention, we grow as a result. And he does this while telling funny stories. Like Shakespeare's very funny. And, he's grim too. Like he makes us cry, he makes us laugh. It's very powerful. And he freaking rhymes when he does it. Like, the rhyming is the least important part of it, but he does, right? Like, it's just like layer upon layer of excellence piled on top of everything else. And it's just amazing. How can one human being have done this? Maybe he had an AI tool. I don't know.
I really enjoy writing. I enjoy the process of it. I think it makes one a better articulator when they're having conversations if they regularly write. And it also gives you an appreciation for life when you write more, because you recollect things that happened. You have moments of gratefulness, you have your own learnings. And if your writing is good enough to share your own personal experiences with the world or what you've learned with the world, and they have those same learning experience or gratefulness or reflection, I think that's what makes an amazing writer. So I really appreciate that answer.
I'm still but an egg. I'm hoping, old as I am, I'm hoping to learn to get better on this.
That's awesome. Now we're going to jump back to something that's really quick. I want to touch on Trump. So he's obviously shaking things up from a geopolitical perspective, even with, historic American allies like Canada, where I am. Whatever he ends up doing with the tariffs, I think the impact of how he's gone about it will be long lasting, and I think could really reshape global alliances, no matter what the results of these tariffs are. I think a lot of damage has been done. What are your thoughts on how...
Even if it's creative destruction, a lot of damage has been done, and we haven't felt the pain yet, really. It's just starting.
What are your thoughts on how, some of these trade policies or even the rhetoric will impact things like inflation and even the dollar's role in the global economy? What do you think the spillover effect's going to be from all this?
I would start by reminding the audience of the ancient Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Though my Chinese friends tell me that's only half the curse. The other half is, and come to the attention of important people. If you lived in interesting times in Chinese history and came to the attention of the emperor, it usually wasn't very good for you.
Right.
And not to make light of it, what I'm going with that is that I do think that we are in truly historic times. I do think that Trump is trying to change the global economic order, not just the United States, clearly America first. And I don't know if he's an angel or a devil. I think he wants to go down in history. He wants to be on a par with Genghis Khan or whoever. He wants to leave his mark on the world. Yeah. I mean, a guy who builds golden towers all over the place, clearly has an edifice complex. This is not somebody who wants to go quietly into the night, right?
Yeah.
And this is his second go at it. He's got a chance here. The significance of that is not to praise or beat up on Trump. I just think, never mind his rhetoric, just looking at what he's doing. And this tells me, this is a person who's bent on leaving his mark on the world, come hell or high water. That's investable, because it means it's not going away. And the markets puke and he backs off from some of his tariffs and so on. It doesn't change course. He backs off a little. He tries to see where he can tweak. He's trying not to have the thing melt down on him before he can get the job done. I do think there is some reality constraint on his choices. If things are not working too severely, that does change his course. He might tack a bit, renegotiate here, this, that, the other. But I don't think it makes him call the whole thing off. And we've got 3 more years and a half. There's a lot of time for stuff to happen here. You can say, oh, well, maybe the midterms cut it short. Well, that's still a year and a half down the road. And if it starts looking like the Dems are going to win, that's all the more reason for the Republicans to say, screw it. We're losing control of Congress anyway. Let's ram through whatever we can now and make it hard for them to undo it. That could actually accelerate the change. For the people who are cheering Doge. And by the way, I love the idea of Doge. And I understand that mistakes have been made, right? And that maybe a scalpel was called for instead of a sledgehammer to do things right and not pull the plug on important things. And so I get that. But I think this is a kind of case where it had to be a sledgehammer. It was that or nothing. If you tried to study this properly and go in with the scalpel approach, I think they'd still be picking the office furniture for the Doge office.
Right.
It was only Elon going in with the kitchen sink that made it possible for anything to happen at all. So the direction matters here. It's not going away. The pain already inflicted matters. It's not going away. The renegotiations, the new deals, they may help. But if you're trying to reindustrialize an entire country, that takes years. So whether you're pro-Trump or anti-Trump, I think that's a reality you have to deal with. If I'm pro-Trump, then even then, I got to say, as much as, I agree with Doge, and I love to see deregulation. I love to see tax cuts. But if the pay-fors aren't there, you got a problem. And if you on the campaign trail promise a golden age from day one, and then once you get elected, it's like, no, we got to go through some short-term pain for long-term gain. And if you listen to Scott Bessent, who seems like the most rational person in that crew, and he's saying, okay, the short-term pain is probably 2 or 3 quarters. Is the average American voter going to put up with that pain for 2 or 3 quarters? I'd be surprised if they put up with it 2 or 3 days, right?
Yeah. Look, I'm in the same boat. This is a multi-year, potentially longer than a decade thing to actually start really seeing. And, no disrespect to Americans whatsoever, but they've had it very, very good for a long time.
Exorbitant privilege.
Exactly. The pain tolerance that this requires, I don't think exists in America right now.
And it does in China.
and it does in China, exactly.
And maybe up in Canada too. This Canadians, Great White North, they're kind of tough. They wrestle with bears in a
We were known about 150 years ago by the Americans as like tough SOBs not to mess with. But we've softened up a little bit too, I will say. But I look at Trump's agenda too with bring manufacturing home and this and that. I also look at, when you look at history, it's like, okay, so World War II happened and Japan and Germany were, crushed literally in battle, and also their infrastructure. At that point, America ramped up its manufacturing capabilities. It had 20-year head start because Japan and Germany, the other two manufacturing powers of the world, had to rebuild. They couldn't even think about it. That created this environment in America where America basically had 30 years of relatively little competition from a manufacturing standpoint. And Trump looks back on that, the 60s and 70s, as like the golden era for American manufacturing.
But does he, or does he just say that? Remember, this is a TV personality. Sure. I'm not disagreeing. I follow your analysis and I get that. It just seems like so ignorant for Trump to say these countries are ripping us off and we've been, paying for their defense for all these years. But to the point of what you're just saying, like anybody you don't even have to be a student in history. If you know anything about the history, this was not an accident. We were not idiots that were taken advantage by others. We did it on purpose.
Yeah.
We funded, particularly for the Cold War, all kinds of things around the world to cement American hegemony, to shore up allies. It was cheaper to help XYZ country in the third world and make friends with them than to, fight the Soviets over it directly or so on. And the world has changed. And I completely agree, by the way, MAGA people don't throw rotten tomatoes at me. I completely agree that it's ridiculous to see China as, a third world emerging economy, right? The second biggest economy in the world, even if there are plenty of poor people there, it shouldn't be given preferential treatment like, some starving banana republic, right? But it's simply not true. And it's abundantly not true that, all these people asleep at the switch just allowed all these countries to take advantage. No, that was a deliberate plan. Mm-hmm. And it was, I think, very cost efficient to fund the world and get all this stuff in exchange for it. So if Trump knows that, sorry, he's lying. Like he's saying that because he knows that's what the audience wants to hear. Them bad, we good. They took advantage of us. And maybe this is necessary, or maybe he thinks it's necessary to reindustrialize America and move things forward. And I gotta say, right, up until Trump, China was still able to carry off this myth that, we're still this, all these poor Chinese people and we still need these most favored nation advantages and so on. And Trump has pretty much blown that up. So even the Dems, beat up on China now. And I'm not anti-China, by the way, either, dear audience, if you're any Chinese people out there. I'm just saying about the reality of the world we live in. To give credit where due, Trump has, I think, broken a myth that needed breaking. If he told falsehoods to do it, I have issues with that.
Likewise.
And so my question was, or my pushback from you is, like, does he really believe these things he's saying, or is he just saying it because he's a TV personality and he's an excellent one? Like, he knows what the audience wants to hear. It's hard to say in that environment what he really believes. So look at what he does, right? People say, don't take him literally, but take him seriously. But I think that's right. I think you got to look at what he's doing, and he can change his rhetoric and he can do an about face on Powell or whatever. But unless he changes course, the investment implications of what's happening now don't change.
On that note, last question, where do we go from here with inflation? Are we headed for stagflation, inflation, deflation? Where are we going? I think stagflation.
I agree. The question is, what kind of stagflation? There's a scenario in which the money helicopters were never grounded. We've been running multi-trillion dollar deficits since the COVID lockdowns, and that never stopped. And I underestimated the importance of this fiscal dominance before, to give Lynn Alden credit there. So they're still there. Whereas the Trump shock, the implications of the Trump shock are screaming recession. If the fiscal dominance overwhelms that, who knows what will happen? So I'm not sure whether we get it, this Trump session that the media likes to trumpet about these days. But there's clearly economic damage happening. I mean, just today we got the JOLTS report, which is lagging. And that long downward slide post-COVID just continues. The widening cracks we've seen in the U.S. labor market since last fall continue, and that's major. Other things being equal, I would say that we should be headed for a recession if we're not in one already. But don't forget the money helicopters. And Don't forget the midterms, right? And don't forget that we've already established no fault of their own, right? Recession is no fault of the people's own. That's good enough reason to send people $1,000 in stimmy checks and so on.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
The answer to your question is garden variety stagflation, where things are not really booming because of the cost, but because of the inflation, they're not tanking either. Or the worst case scenario is like you get actual recession and higher prices. You get higher prices, but lower economic activity. I think that could happen. I don't know which it'll be. In either case, it's great for gold. It's neutral for uranium because it's baseload power. It's question mark for silver. It's near-term bearish for copper. But in either case, we eventually get that inflation. And that's bullish for all commodities come that day. And I don't think it's a very distant day.
Agreed. This has been a great conversation, Lobo. I really appreciate your time. Before I let you go, where can our viewers find you online? Tell us a little bit more about the Independent Speculator and what you do there.
Okay. Well, I'm not an economist. I'm just a due diligence guy. Doug sent me out for years and years to go kick rocks on his behalf, and I do that for my readers. The simple sales pitch here, for anybody still listening, is if you sign up at independentspeculator.com for our free weekly digest, you can see how I think, see how my analysis goes, decide whether you'd like to hire me via one of my paid publications to be your due diligence guy. Can't promise you'll like it, can't promise you'll agree with everything I say, but I can promise that I won't spam you with a flood of daily advertisements. I hate that. You get one email per week, that's it, and you can judge my work from there.
Love that. That's the same model that we have, one a week. All right, Lobo, once again, really want to thank you for coming on today. This conversation was awesome, so thanks for your time.
Thank you.